Cowboy brought her home, thinking she was injured, later realized it was an Apache marriage ritual. The desert stretched endlessly under the fading light of the late afternoon sun. The orange glow kissed the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Samuel Hayes, a cowboy who had spent most of his life in these rugged lands, guided his horse slowly along a narrow trail. The air was dry, and a soft wind carried the scent of sagebrush and earth warmed by the day. Samuel was a man of few words, used to the quiet of the open land, but he had always felt a strange connection to the wide horizon and the endless possibilities it seemed to promise. That day had been long and tiring. Samuel had been driving a small herd of cattle across a ridge far from his home. The animals had been restless, some refusing to move in the heat, and he had spent hours coaxing them along with a mix of patience and gentle authority. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of deep red and gold, Samuel finally decided it was time to head back to his small ranch. His body ached from the ride, and his throat was dry, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the herd was safe and accounted for. As he rode along the trail, Samuel noticed a figure in the distance. At first, he thought it might be another traveler, but the figure's movements were irregular, almost stumbling. Squinting against the sun, he realized it was a young woman walking along the rocky path, her steps uneven as if she were struggling to keep her balance. Her cloak, made of soft brown cloth, was torn in several places, and her hair, dark and flowing, seemed to have been caught in the branches of nearby bushes. Something about her unsettled him, yet drew him closer. Samuel slowed his horse and called out gently, "Are you all right, miss?" The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before lowering them again. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet intensity that made Samuel pause. He noticed a faint bruise on her cheek and a small cut on her arm. Without thinking twice, he guided his horse closer. "Here, let me help you," he said, offering his hand. The woman hesitated, but something in Samuel's calm demeanor seemed to encourage her. She allowed him to lift her gently onto the horse behind him. Samuel had helped many people before, travelers who had lost their way or been caught in the unforgiving desert, but there was something unusual about this woman. She did not speak much, and her silence seemed more deliberate than a simple language barrier. Samuel felt a mixture of curiosity and concern. Who was she? How had she ended up alone in this harsh terrain? As they rode, the wind whispered across the canyon, carrying the faint sound of distant birds returning to their nests. Samuel offered her a piece of dried meat from his saddlebag, but she only shook her head slightly. He could see the sun beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long, dramatic shadows across the rocks. He knew that night would come quickly in the desert, and the temperature would drop. His small cabin, with its sturdy wooden walls and simple comforts, seemed worlds away, but he was determined to get her there safely. Along the trail, Samuel spoke softly, trying to reassure her, though he was not sure she understood. "You'll be safe at my place," he said. "We can take care of those cuts." She only nodded once, her dark eyes observing him carefully, as if studying his intentions. Samuel wondered what kind of life she had led to bring her here, alone and seemingly vulnerable. He was a man who had learned to read people through their actions rather than their words, and her quiet composure told him she was no ordinary traveler. By the time they reached the small valley where his ranch lay, the sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, leaving a cool twilight in its place. Samuel led his horse up a gentle incline to his cabin, the familiar wooden structure standing against the fading sky like a welcoming friend. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, the air warm from the small fire he had kept burning during the day. He helped the woman down from the horse, guiding her carefully to a chair near the hearth. Samuel began to examine her injuries more closely. The cut on her arm was shallow but needed cleaning, and the bruise on her cheek looked painful. He dipped a cloth in warm water and gently dabbed at the wound, careful not to hurt her. She flinched slightly, but did not resist. There was a strange dignity in her movements, a calm acceptance that made Samuel respect her even more. He could see that she had endured hardships before, though not the kind the desert alone would bring. For a long while they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Samuel wondered about her story. Where had she come from? Why was she walking alone through the desert? Every question seemed important, yet he knew some answers might not come easily. He poured her a cup of water, and though she did not speak, she accepted it gratefully, her eyes meeting his briefly with a hint of trust. As night fell, Samuel prepared a simple meal of bread and beans, placing a small portion on a plate for her. She ate quietly, carefully, without a word, yet her movements showed gratitude. Samuel felt a growing sense of responsibility. He had thought he was rescuing someone in need, a stranger who had been hurt or lost, but there was something more complex in her presence. He could not yet understand it, but he felt compelled to protect and care for her. The night grew colder, and the wind howled softly outside the cabin. Samuel had stoked the fire, ensuring the warmth would reach her, and he offered a blanket for her to rest. She accepted, tucking it around herself with careful precision. Samuel settled into his own chair, his mind restless with thoughts of the day's events. The desert could be unforgiving, yet tonight it had brought him an unexpected visitor, someone who seemed to carry an air of mystery and strength. Hours passed quietly, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of the wind outside. Samuel watched her sleep for a moment, noting the peace on her face despite the apparent hardships she had endured. There was a resilience in her that intrigued him, a sense that she had faced life's challenges with courage and grace. He realized that whatever had brought her to him, it was no ordinary meeting. It was as if fate had guided her steps to his cabin, asking him to step beyond his usual routines and face something unknown. By the time the first light of dawn touched the cabin, Samuel felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. He had done what he could to care for her, yet he knew that her story was far from simple. She stirred, opening her eyes slowly, and for the first time she spoke a few words in her language. Samuel could not understand them, but the tone was calm and deliberate, as if she were explaining herself without urgency. He realized then that this encounter was the beginning of something much larger than he had imagined, a journey that would challenge his understanding of the world and his place in it. As the sun rose over the desert, casting a golden light over the rugged landscape, Samuel prepared for the day. He had a feeling that he was about to learn more than he had ever expected about courage, tradition, and the hidden connections between people. The woman, whose name he did not yet know, had entered his life quietly, yet her presence was undeniable. In her silence, there was a story waiting to be told, a truth that he would come to understand only through patience, respect, and open-heartedness. Samuel knew that the desert had many secrets, and perhaps this woman was one of them. He had come across travelers, lost souls, and wanderers before, but none had left such a deep impression on him. Her calm strength, her quiet dignity, and the mysterious way she had appeared in his life suggested that the days ahead would be unlike any he had ever known. He resolved to watch over her, to care for her without pressing for answers, and to respect whatever path had brought her to his doorstep. In that quiet morning light, with the vast desert stretching endlessly beyond his cabin, Samuel felt a mix of wonder and responsibility. The woman had seemed vulnerable the night before, but now he saw her strength, her ability to endure and face challenges without fear. He understood that the story he thought he was living, of a simple cowboy helping a stranger, was only the beginning. The desert, the woman, and the days to come promised lessons he could not yet imagine, lessons in respect, understanding, and the surprising ways life could unfold when least expected. And so, as the morning sun climbed higher, Samuel, and the young woman shared a quiet meal, neither fully understanding the journey that had begun, yet both aware that their lives were about to change forever. He had brought her home, thinking she was injured, but the truth of her presence, and the story behind it, would soon reveal a depth and beauty that neither of them could have foreseen. The morning sun had risen fully now, spilling light across the small cabin and the dusty landscape beyond. Samuel Hayes had already stoked the fire to keep the chill of the early hours at bay. The young woman, whose presence had so quietly entered his life, moved about the cabin with a calm, purposeful grace. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced challenges before and understood the ways of the world far beyond her years. Samuel watched her carefully, fascinated by her strength and the mysterious aura that seemed to surround her. He had spent the previous night tending to her injuries, cleaning the small cuts and bruises that had seemed so alarming when he first found her. Now, however, he began to notice something different. Her movements were deliberate and precise, almost like someone who had learned to survive through skill and awareness. She did not speak much, but her eyes were full of intelligence and curiosity, constantly observing him and the cabin, as if trying to understand the strange environment she had been brought into. Samuel poured himself a cup of coffee and offered her a small portion. She accepted with a polite nod but did not drink it immediately. Instead, she sat quietly near the window, looking out at the desert stretching endlessly beyond the cabin. There was a calmness to her that was both comforting and puzzling. Samuel wondered how she had come to be alone in such a harsh and unforgiving land. The thought that she might have wandered for days, or even longer, unsettled him. Later in the morning, a traveling trader happened by, riding along the trail with a small cart loaded with supplies. He stopped briefly at Samuel's cabin, greeting him with a familiar nod. Samuel had known this man, a middle-aged trader named Thomas, for several years. They had often exchanged news, supplies, and stories from the wider region. Today, however, Thomas's attention was immediately drawn to the young woman. His eyes widened slightly, and he leaned closer to Samuel, speaking in a hushed tone. "Samuel," Thomas began, "do you know who this woman is?" Samuel shook his head, still unsure how to explain her sudden appearance. Thomas glanced at her carefully, noting her calm demeanor and the way she held herself. "She's part of the Apache community," he explained. "And what you've just done, bringing her here thinking she was injured, is part of a very old ritual. You might not realize it, but you've become part of something sacred." Samuel's brow furrowed. "A ritual?" he asked. "What do you mean?" Thomas looked around cautiously before speaking further. "In some Apache traditions," he said, "young women take part in what's called a captivity and rescue ceremony. It's not real danger. It's a test, a tradition that signals a woman's readiness for marriage. The idea is that the chosen man finds her and brings her home, showing courage, honor, and respect. You didn't just rescue her, you participated in that tradition." Samuel felt a mixture of surprise and confusion. He had always respected the Apache people from a distance, observing their skills, their traditions, and their connection to the land, but he had never been part of their ceremonies. To realize that he had unknowingly entered into something so meaningful was both startling and humbling. He looked at the young woman, who now seemed calm and patient, as if she understood more than he did. There was a quiet strength in her gaze that told him she had chosen to come to him, not out of fear, but as part of this ritual. For the rest of the morning, Samuel tried to understand more about the ceremony. Thomas explained that it was not about capturing or forcing anyone into marriage. Instead, it was a test of character, designed to show that the man who found the woman could be trusted to care for her. The ritual emphasized courage, honesty, and the ability to protect and respect the young woman. By bringing her to his cabin safely, Samuel had demonstrated these qualities without even realizing it. Samuel felt a strange sense of pride mixed with humility. He had acted out of concern, not understanding the deeper meaning of his actions. Yet somehow, in his simple act of kindness, he had passed a test that had been in place for generations. He glanced at the young woman again, noticing how serene she appeared. There was no fear in her eyes, no anxiety, only a quiet assurance, as if she had known all along that he would be the one to find her. As the day progressed, Samuel sought to learn more about her culture. He remembered stories from other travelers, tales of Apache courage, wisdom, and close family ties. Now he was seeing it firsthand. The young woman carried herself with dignity, speaking only when necessary, yet communicating volumes through her actions, her expressions, and the calm certainty of her presence. Samuel realized that his understanding of bravery and resilience had been limited before this encounter. He had faced dangers on the trail, weathered storms, and navigated the wild desert, but he had never encountered someone who embodied quiet strength in such a compelling way. Throughout the morning, they shared small tasks in the cabin. Samuel repaired a section of the roof that had been damaged in a recent storm, and she helped by handing him tools, moving carefully around the space. Each interaction was simple yet meaningful. Samuel began to notice small details about her. The careful way she handled objects, the quiet respect she showed for the fire and the cabin, and the way she seemed to understand the rhythm of life in this harsh land. He realized that these traits were part of the wisdom Thomas had described, wisdom passed down through generations, learned from observation and experience rather than from formal teaching. By midday, Samuel felt a growing sense of connection to the young woman. He still did not know her name, nor did he fully understand the traditions that had brought her to his cabin, but he knew that something significant was unfolding. The desert, vast and indifferent, had brought them together in a way that felt purposeful. He had always believed in fate in a quiet, practical sense, but now he saw it in a more profound way. There was a reason she had appeared on that trail, and it was not mere chance. As the hours passed, more questions came to Samuel's mind. How old was she? How had she come to be alone in the desert? What family did she have, and how would they view this encounter? He realized that he needed to approach these questions with care and respect. Whatever her background, her presence in his cabin was not a matter to be treated lightly. He resolved to learn from her, and from those who understood her culture, rather than making assumptions. In the late afternoon, Samuel rode into the nearby settlement to gather supplies and to speak with others who might know more about the young woman's community. He returned with bread, dried fruit, and a few small gifts that might be considered respectful gestures in her culture. When he arrived back at the cabin, she was sitting near the fire, quietly watching the play of light across the walls. He placed the items before her, explaining in simple words that they were for her. She accepted them with a small, appreciative nod. The exchange, though brief, carried significance. Samuel realized that communication did not always rely on words. Actions, gestures, and respect often spoke louder than speech. The young woman, through her calm presence and thoughtful behavior, was teaching him this lesson in a way he could understand. He felt a sense of admiration growing within him, not just for her but for the culture and traditions she represented. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep shade of purple, the last light fading from the horizon. Samuel lit the fire once more and prepared a simple meal for both of them. They ate quietly, the room filled with the soft crackle of flames. There was no need for idle conversation. The silence was comfortable, a shared understanding that transcended language. Samuel began to feel a sense of peace he had rarely known, a feeling that perhaps this unexpected encounter was exactly what his life had been missing. Before long, the young woman moved to the small window and looked out at the desert. Samuel joined her, noticing the way she studied the distant hills and valleys with careful attention. "You know this land well," he said gently, though unsure if she could understand him. She only smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Samuel realized that knowledge of the land, of its rhythms, dangers, and beauty, was part of her strength. He had assumed she was vulnerable, but now he saw that she possessed a deep connection to this world that even he, as a seasoned cowboy, could respect and admire. Night settled over the desert, bringing with it a quiet stillness. The stars began to appear, shimmering in the clear sky. Samuel and the young woman sat near the fire, the warmth a small comfort against the chill that crept into the cabin. He thought of the day's events, the moment he found her, the ride back to the cabin, the gradual understanding of her purpose. Everything had happened with a sense of inevitability, as if the desert itself had guided them together. Samuel realized that this encounter was more than a simple act of rescue. It was a lesson in patience, respect, and understanding. He had assumed he was helping someone in need, but in truth, he was participating in a tradition far older than himself. He had been chosen, perhaps unknowingly, to honor the values of courage, respect, and integrity. And in doing so, he had begun a journey that would teach him about life, culture, and the unexpected ways people could enter one another's lives. As they both prepared to rest for the night, Samuel felt a growing sense of responsibility. This young woman had come to him under circumstances he did not fully understand, yet he was determined to honor her presence and her culture. The desert had brought them together, and he knew that in the days to come, he would learn more than he could imagine about bravery, trust, and the hidden depths of human connection. And so, with the quiet hum of the desert outside and the soft glow of the fire within, Samuel settled into his chair, reflecting on the extraordinary events of the day. He had thought he was rescuing an injured stranger, but in truth, he was witnessing the beginning of a profound story, one that would teach him lessons far beyond the ordinary life of a cowboy. The young woman, serene and composed, had entered his life quietly but left an impression that would never fade. Days passed quietly at Samuel Hayes's cabin, yet each day brought new insights, small discoveries, and an ever-growing sense of connection between him and the young woman. Though she had not yet spoken much in a language he could understand, her presence filled the cabin with a calm, steady rhythm. Samuel found himself learning from her actions, from the careful way she handled objects, and from her unspoken awareness of her surroundings. Each movement seemed intentional, measured, and full of meaning. Samuel began to notice the deeper details of her behavior. She would tend to the fire each morning, adding small pieces of wood at just the right moment to keep the flames steady, yet never letting them become overwhelming. She arranged the cabin's simple furnishings with care, creating a sense of order and warmth. Even the smallest actions, setting a cup of water on the table, moving a broom in a deliberate arc, folding cloth neatly, spoke to him of patience, discipline, and respect for life's routines. Curiosity grew within Samuel, but he realized he could not rush her or demand explanations. He remembered what the trader Thomas had said. The young woman's presence was part of a sacred ritual in her culture. Samuel had brought her home, believing he was rescuing someone in need, but he had unwittingly become part of a tradition older than he could imagine. That realization humbled him. He understood that to truly honor her, he needed to observe, learn, and act with respect. One morning, Samuel decided to try a small gesture to bridge the gap between them. He gathered herbs from the surrounding desert, ones he knew were safe and useful, and began to prepare a simple tea. He watched as she approached, curiosity in her eyes. She nodded slightly when he offered her a cup. Though she did not speak, Samuel felt as if she understood the intention behind his actions. In that moment, he realized that kindness, patience, and respect could communicate far more than words ever could. Over time, Samuel began to hear small phrases from her in her native language. Though he could not yet understand the words, the tone and inflection carried meaning. There was warmth in the way she spoke to him, a softness that suggested trust, and moments of quiet humor that revealed a subtle sense of playfulness. Samuel found himself smiling in return, even without full understanding, recognizing the universal language of shared experiences and gentle gestures. As days turned into a week, Samuel decided to seek more information from the local Apache community. He wanted to understand the ritual fully, not to interfere, but to ensure that he respected its significance. Guided by Thomas, the trader, he met with a few elders who were familiar with the customs. Sitting under the shade of a large mesquite tree, Samuel listened carefully as they explained the meaning behind the tradition. The elders spoke of courage, trust, and honor. They explained that the ritual symbolized a woman's readiness to enter a partnership with someone capable of respecting and supporting her. It was not a test of dominance or control, but a demonstration of responsibility, compassion, and moral character. By bringing her safely to his cabin, Samuel had unknowingly shown these qualities. He felt a mix of humility and awe, realizing the depth of meaning behind what he had initially perceived as a simple act of help. Returning to the cabin, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He approached the young woman, who was carefully arranging dried herbs near the fire. Though he could not speak her language, he gestured to the herbs, indicating that he had learned about them and wanted to help. She looked at him, a faint smile playing on her lips, and handed him a small bundle of leaves. Their silent exchange conveyed a trust that words might have complicated. Samuel felt a deep respect for her intelligence, her patience, and the quiet wisdom she carried. As the days continued, Samuel began to observe how her presence influenced the surrounding environment. She taught him subtle ways to work with the land rather than against it. He learned to notice signs in the desert, the direction of the wind, the patterns of animal tracks, the location of water sources hidden beneath the surface. He realized that she had grown up with knowledge that could have taken him decades to acquire on his own. Her understanding of nature, survival, and balance impressed him deeply, and he began to feel grateful for the unexpected lessons she brought into his life. In the evenings, Samuel would sometimes speak to her in gentle, simple words, sharing stories of his life on the ranch, the long hours spent with cattle, and the vastness of the desert he had always called home. She listened attentively, occasionally nodding or offering a small gesture to show she understood. In turn, he watched her movements, her thoughtful ways of doing daily tasks, and began to interpret small signals of her thoughts and emotions. It was a slow, patient form of communication, but it deepened their connection in ways that transcended language. One afternoon, Samuel noticed her pausing near the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He joined her, curious about what had captured her attention. She pointed toward the distant hills, gesturing in a way that suggested a story. Samuel realized that this was her way of sharing a piece of her world with him. Though he could not understand every detail, he felt a growing appreciation for the culture, the rituals, and the values she represented. It was a humbling experience, teaching him that true understanding often came from careful observation, respect, and patience. During one particularly quiet day, Samuel began to reflect on the events that had brought her to his cabin. He remembered the moment he had first seen her struggling along the trail, the decision to help her, and the journey back across the canyon. Each step had been guided by instinct, but now he saw that those instincts had aligned with something much larger than himself. It was as if fate, or the wisdom of the desert, had brought them together to share a unique journey of learning, understanding, and mutual respect. In time, Samuel began to notice subtle signs of the ritual she had participated in. Small gestures, quiet customs, and careful routines suggested that her presence in his home was not random. The elder's explanations began to make sense, and he realized that he had become part of a sacred process, one that honored both his character and her choices. He felt a deep responsibility to honor that tradition, not just for her, but for the generations who had practiced it before. Evenings became a time of reflection and quiet companionship. Samuel and the young woman would sit near the fire, sharing the warmth and the simple comfort of being in the same space. Though conversation was limited, their understanding grew. He learned to recognize the small signs of her moods, her expressions of curiosity, and her subtle humor. Each day, he grew more aware of the depth of her character, the strength of her spirit, and the wisdom she carried within her. One day, Samuel noticed her carefully preparing a small offering near the fire. He watched as she arranged dried herbs, small stones, and other natural items in a deliberate pattern. Though he did not know the significance, he recognized the care and respect in her actions. It was a quiet ritual of her own, a practice that connected her to her culture, her family, and the land. Samuel felt honored to witness it, understanding that true respect required observation and patience, rather than interference or explanation. Throughout these days, Samuel's admiration for her continued to grow. He began to see her not as a stranger in need of help, but as a person of strength, intelligence, and profound dignity. Her calm, deliberate actions, her quiet confidence, and her deep understanding of her surroundings had transformed his perception of bravery, patience, and respect. He realized that she had taught him more about life, culture, and human connection than he had learned in years of solitary work on the ranch. By the end of the week, Samuel had developed a routine that accommodated both their needs. He would tend to the ranch work during the day, while she assisted with simple tasks, guiding him gently with her knowledge and observation. In return, he provided food, warmth, and safety, all the while learning from her presence and the wisdom she brought into his life. Each day became a lesson in patience, humility, and respect, deepening the bond between them in ways that transcended words. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues over the desert, Samuel finally felt a moment of clarity. The ritual she had participated in, the careful customs, and her deliberate presence in his life, all of it revealed a profound truth. She had chosen him, not through fear or circumstance, but through a tradition that valued courage, honor, and respect. He had acted with integrity, compassion, and honesty, and in doing so, had fulfilled the essence of the ritual without even knowing it. Samuel realized that his life was changing in subtle yet powerful ways. The young woman had entered his world quietly, yet her impact was undeniable. She had taught him about patience, about understanding, about the quiet power of observation, and the importance of respecting traditions that were older and wiser than he could comprehend. Each day spent with her deepened his appreciation for the complexity of human connection, the beauty of cultural practices, and the unexpected ways in which lives could intersect. As night settled over the desert once again, Samuel and the young woman sat near the fire, sharing the comfort of warmth and the quiet companionship that had grown between them. The stars glittered in the clear sky, reflecting the vastness of the world and the mysteries it held. Samuel felt a deep sense of gratitude for the desert, for the lessons he was learning, and for the presence of this remarkable young woman in his life. He knew that the days ahead would continue to bring discoveries, challenges, and insights. But he also knew that he was ready to embrace them, guided by respect, patience, and the understanding that true connection required both observation and humility. The young woman, serene and composed, had become a teacher, a guide, and a partner in ways he had never anticipated. And as they both looked toward the future, there was a quiet certainty that their lives were now intertwined in a story that was only beginning to unfold. The days continued to pass quietly, yet the air around Samuel Hayes's cabin was filled with a sense of anticipation. The young woman, whose name Samuel had only recently learned was Ahulai, had become an important presence in his life. Each day, he noticed more of her calm strength, the careful attention she paid to the land, and the quiet wisdom in her gestures. Samuel felt that their connection was deepening in a way that neither of them could fully explain, yet both understood. Samuel had spent much of the past week learning from Ahuli, observing her actions, and trying to understand the traditions that guided her life. Through simple gestures, shared tasks, and careful observation, he had begun to piece together the meaning of the ritual she had participated in, the ceremony in which a young woman symbolically allowed herself to be found by a man who would later become her partner. Samuel realized that he had unknowingly become part of something sacred, a tradition meant to honor courage, respect, and trust. One morning, Samuel awoke to find Ahuli preparing a small fire outside the cabin. She moved with a purposeful grace, arranging small pieces of wood carefully to ensure the flames would burn steadily without getting out of control. Samuel approached, quietly observing her. She glanced at him and nodded, a small but meaningful gesture. It was her way of acknowledging him, showing trust, and inviting him to share in her task without words. Samuel felt a warm sense of connection and realized that he had come to rely on these small moments of understanding and cooperation. As they worked together through the morning, Samuel noticed that Ahuli's eyes often scanned the horizon, watching the movement of birds, the patterns of clouds, and the subtle changes in the landscape. She had a deep knowledge of the desert and its rhythms, knowledge that he, despite years of experience, had never fully understood. She taught him to notice the signs of water sources, to read the wind for changes in weather, and to recognize the tracks of animals that might otherwise go unnoticed. Samuel was amazed at her awareness, and he felt gratitude for the lessons she offered so freely. Later in the day, Samuel and Ahuli visited the small Apache community nearby. The elders greeted them warmly, pleased to see Samuel had acted with honesty, courage, and respect. They explained again the full significance of the ritual. It was not just a test of bravery, but a demonstration of character, compassion, and the ability to provide care and protection. The elders smiled knowingly at Samuel, acknowledging that he had fulfilled the essence of the ceremony without even realizing it. Samuel felt a deep sense of humility and honor. He had acted from instinct and kindness, yet he had participated in a tradition that carried generations of meaning. Back at the cabin, Samuel reflected on all he had learned. He realized that his life was changing in profound ways. Ahuli's presence had taught him patience, observation, and the value of respect for other cultures. He understood that true connection required listening, learning, and acting with integrity. Every day with her revealed another layer of wisdom, and he felt both humbled and inspired. Over the following days, Samuel and Ahuli continued their routine. They worked together on the ranch, prepared meals, and explored the surrounding desert. Though they still spoke little in words, their communication had grown remarkably. Samuel had learned to understand her gestures, expressions, and subtle signals. In return, Ahuli seemed to understand his intentions, his care, and the quiet affection that had begun to grow within him. Their bond deepened naturally, founded on trust, mutual respect, and shared experiences. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink over the distant hills, Samuel and Ahuli sat outside the cabin. The sky was painted with streaks of color, and the desert air was cool and calm. Samuel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past weeks and the lessons he had learned. He realized that he had not only discovered the significance of the ritual, but had also come to deeply appreciate the values and wisdom it represented: honor, courage, patience, and respect for life in all its forms. Ahuli turned toward him and spoke a few words in her language. Though Samuel could not understand every word, the tone was gentle and filled with meaning. He sensed that she was expressing trust, gratitude, and a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them. He smiled, realizing that their connection did not require complete understanding of words. It was based on shared experience, respect, and the recognition of each other's strengths and intentions. As the days continued, Samuel became more confident in his role in this unfolding story. He understood that he had been chosen, in a sense, to demonstrate the qualities that the ritual sought to honor. Ahulai's decision to allow herself to be found was not one of weakness, but of trust and wisdom. She had recognized his honesty, his courage, and his respect for her as an individual. Samuel felt a deep sense of gratitude for the trust she had placed in him, and he vowed to honor it in every way possible. One morning, Ahulai guided Samuel through a series of small rituals and customs from her culture. She showed him how to arrange certain items as symbols of respect and protection, how to perform simple tasks that carried deeper meaning, and how to honor the land and its resources. Samuel followed carefully, learning to see the world through her eyes. He began to understand the wisdom embedded in these practices, recognizing that they were not mere customs, but ways of teaching respect, patience, and awareness of the world. By midweek, Samuel felt a sense of readiness for what was to come. The elders had indicated that the ritual was reaching its natural conclusion, and Samuel now understood its purpose fully. He had demonstrated courage, honesty, and care. Ahulai had trusted him and shared her world with him. The ceremony was not a test of power or control, but a recognition of the values that both had shown in their actions and interactions. Samuel felt a mixture of pride, humility, and gratitude for being part of something so meaningful. On a calm afternoon, Samuel and Ahulai returned to the community to meet with the elders. The sun was warm, and the desert stretched endlessly around them. The elders greeted them with smiles, acknowledging the bond that had grown. They explained that the ritual had been successfully completed. Samuel had proven his integrity and ability to honor Ahulai, and Ahulai had demonstrated trust and discernment. Samuel felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not for himself alone, but for the mutual respect and understanding that had developed between them. Returning to the cabin, Samuel and Ahulai shared a quiet moment near the fire. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and earth, and the sky above was clear and full of stars. Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them together, from the moment he had found her along the trail to the lessons, small acts of care, and shared experiences that had defined the past weeks. He realized that life had a way of teaching lessons through unexpected encounters, and that true understanding came from patience, respect, and open-heartedness. In the following days, their bond grew stronger. Samuel learned to anticipate Ahulai's needs, and she, in turn, seemed to sense his intentions. Together, they managed the cabin and the surrounding land, sharing knowledge, labor, and quiet moments of companionship. Their relationship was built not on words alone, but on trust, shared experience, and the mutual recognition of character and values. Samuel felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that their connection had been formed in the truest sense of respect and understanding. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Samuel took a moment to look at Ahulai. She was arranging small items near the fire, a quiet ritual of her own making. Samuel understood that this was her way of honoring tradition, life, and the bond they shared. He approached her gently, offering his hand in a simple gesture of partnership. Ahulai looked at him, a soft smile on her face, and accepted. In that moment, words were unnecessary. The gesture spoke volumes about trust, commitment, and shared understanding. The elders had explained that the ritual symbolized the beginning of a partnership, one based on mutual respect, trust, and care. Samuel now understood fully that he and Ahulai were entering this partnership not out of obligation, but out of shared recognition of each other's strength, wisdom, and integrity. It was a partnership that honored both the traditions of her people and the values that he had demonstrated through his actions. As the weeks turned into months, Samuel and Ahuli continued their life together, blending the practical skills of ranch life with the wisdom and traditions she had shared. They worked side by side, learning from each other, respecting each other's knowledge, and supporting each other through challenges. Their days were filled with shared labor, quiet companionship, and moments of laughter that spoke to the depth of their bond. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories, Samuel in words, Ahuli through gestures, expressions, and occasional phrases in her language. Each exchange deepened their understanding, built trust, and strengthened the connection that had begun with a single act of kindness along the desert trail. Samuel felt a profound gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, and for the unexpected gift of Ahuli's presence in his life. Over time, Samuel came to see the full significance of what had happened. He had thought he was rescuing an injured stranger, but he had been participating in a sacred tradition that honored character, courage, and mutual respect. Ahuli had taught him lessons that went far beyond survival or practical skills. She had shown him the value of patience, observation, and cultural understanding. Together, they had created a life rooted in trust, care, and shared experience, a life that honored both of their worlds. And so, as the desert sun set once more, Samuel and Ahuli sat together, watching the horizon, the sky painted in brilliant colors. Their journey had begun with a single moment of compassion and had grown into a partnership of respect, understanding, and deep connection. The ritual, once mysterious and unknown, had revealed its true purpose, not control or obligation, but the recognition of character, the trust in one another, and the beginning of a shared life built on honor, care, and mutual respect. In the quiet of that desert evening, Samuel realized that life often surprises those who are open to its lessons. He had thought he was rescuing a stranger, but in truth, he had discovered a new way of seeing the world, a deeper appreciation for culture, and a bond that would endure for a lifetime. Ahuli, serene and wise, had chosen to share her life with him, and together, they stepped forward into a future filled with understanding, respect, and shared purpose.